Hey guys, tonight we're slipping back into a time when the world didn't just get cold, it went quiet. You wake up beneath a sagging thatch roof somewhere in the medieval countryside, and the first thing you notice isn't the pale winter light leaking through the shutters. It's your own breath, it's puffing out like ghost smoke in the air. The world outside is white and brittle, as though someone forgot to thaw reality overnight. You pull your blanket tighter and realize, with a sort of sleepy dread, that the hardest months of the year have only just begun. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments, because I always love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your morning begins with a sound that's half sigh, half grown the creak of ice on the wooden door. You nudge it open, and it's like stepping into a painting done entirely in shades of frost. Every roof sparkles, every branch glitters like spun glass, and every sound your boots crunching, a distant croakums sharpened by the cold. It's beautiful, sure, but it's also the kind of beauty that could kill you if you admire it too long in medieval Europe. Winter wasn't just a season, it was an adversary. Food stores dwindled, warmth became a luxury, and daylight itself felt rationed by some stingy cosmic accountant. You could almost imagine the sun yawning and saying, "Hey, you'll be fine," before taking a 3-month vacation. Still, life went on. The villagers stirred before dawn because daylight was too precious to waste. Fires had to be coaxed back from embers. Animals had to be fed before they froze in their stalls. You trudge toward the barn, and every breath stings your lungs like vinegar. The air smells faintly of wood smoke manure and the metallic tang of frost. A mainstream historical fact. During the medieval period, especially in what historians call the Little Ice Age, from about the 14th to 19th centuries, temperatures across Europe dropped dramatically. Growing seasons shortened, rivers froze, and entire harvests failed. For common folk, winter wasn't a postcard scene. It was an annual trial by ice. You scooped handfuls of hay to feed the animals, the straw stiff with rime. Somewhere in the back, a cow exhales a misty sigh that looks exactly how you feel: tired, cold, and ready to complain to management. The barn cat watches you from a beam, her tail twitching like she's judging your technique. She probably is. You might think the rich had it easy. Castles, right? Big, roaring fires. But even stone walls couldn't keep out the chill. They were drafty, damp, and impossible to heat evenly. You'd be warm in front of the fire and freezing behind it. Imagine binge watching your favorite series with one side of your body sweating and the other side is turning into a popsicle. Here's a quirky tidbit. People in some northern villages used to sleep with their livestock in the same room, not out of affection, but efficiency. Cow body heat was nature's central heating system, and yes, it smelled exactly like you're imagining as daylight grows. You join others trudging to the frozen river to break ice for water. Each swing of the axe echoes off the banks, and each breath feels like a small rebellion. Historians still argue whether communal winter routines like these built stronger social bonds or just simmered everyone's shared irritation. Imagine spending every day with your neighbors. Everyone equally cold, hungry, and irritable. Basically, a medieval group project that lasted until April. Somewhere in the distance, church bells ring, muffled by snow. The sound carries strangely soft, yet commanding. Religion shaped winter life more deeply than the seasons themselves. The church calendar dictated when you could eat, work, and rest. The worst blizzards often coincided with long fasting periods, because, of course they did. You wander back to the village green, past cottages squatting under snow like tired animals. Smoke seeps from every thatch roof, curling into a gray sky. Children chase each other with sticks, their laughter thin and brittle in the cold. You notice one of them scraping frost from a wall and eating it like candy. That's either innocent fun or a symptom of mineral deficiency, possibly both by midday. The sun climbs no higher than the steeple. The air dozing tea warm. You can smell the fire's burning peat and wood, a thick, oily scent that seeps into your clothes. Even the dogs look annoyed at existing. Winter has a way of pressing everything flat, like time itself has slowed to a sleepy crawl. You think about food, what little there is, and realize that tonight's meal will depend on whether someone remembered to soak the beans. Dried peas, salted meat, turnips if you're lucky. If not, thin soup flavored with whatever was found under the floorboards. And no, that's not a joke. People actually did that. Food was too precious to waste. Hence, creative cuisine wasn't a trend. It was survival instinct wrapped in hunger pangs. Night comes early, sneaking in before you're ready. Shadows spilled across the snow, and the cold thickens, biting an exposed skin. The village retreats indoors, each door closing like a heartbeat fading. The fire crackles. Sparks jump like tiny stars. You wrap yourself in layers of wool that itch but keep you alive. This is the rhythm of the medieval winter waking. Working, waiting, always waiting. For warmth, for spring, for something to remind you that life hasn't frozen completely. You can almost hear the world holding its breath, suspended between endurance and surrender. One last thing before you drift toward that firelight. Remember, no one back then thought this was unusual. This was life, brutal, cyclical, and, in a strange way, deeply communal. Every flake of frost and every aching joint told the same story. Humans learning to adapt, to keep moving, to hope for dawn, even when dawn was colder than the night. Tomorrow, you'll face hunger itself, but for now, you'll let your eyes close to the sound of wind brushing the shutters, whispering like the ghost of another winter that refuses to die. Morning again, you can call it that. The sun is a weak coin behind gray clouds, and the snow crunches beneath your boots like breaking bones of the earth. Your stomach growls before you've even left your straw pallet. Hunger in medieval winter isn't just discomfort, it's your most loyal companion. It wakes with you, walks with you, and goes to bed, still gnawing at your ribs. The villagers call it the hunger season. From late November to early March, the abundance of autumn rots into scarcity. You step into the dim interior of your cottage, where a clay pot simmers over a tired fire. The smell, let's just say you wouldn't pay for it at any restaurant, even with a coupon. A thick, beige sludge bubbles, lazily barley gruel, today's breakfast, and probably dinner too. You stir it with a wooden spoon that's older than you and taste it. It's warm, bland, and carries the faint flavor of hopelessness. The truth is, food preservation back then was both an art and a gamble. Salting, smoking, drying all methods that worked, sort of. One mainstream historical fact: medieval households relied heavily on summer and autumn stores. But poor harvests could mean months of starvation. In bad years, whole regions suffered. Chroniclers in 1315 wrote of people eating cats, dogs, and worse during the Great Famine that swept Europe. You glance toward the barn and decide not to name the chickens. Just in case, you open your small wooden chest to check your supplies, some dried beans, a few onions shriveled into angry little fists, and one hunk of salted pork so old it might file for retirement. It smells fine. Probably has become your favorite seasoning. A knock on the door reads, your neighbor. Breath clouding the air. She's holding a bundle of something wrapped in cloth. Turnips. You trade her a cup of grain for a few, 'cause trade is the only thing keeping the village fed now. No one's rich enough to hoard. Everyone's too hungry to be proud. You peel a turnip, the knife slipping against its icy skin, and think about the nobles up at the manor. Their pantries still overflow with preserved meats, honey, imported spices, barrels of ale. Sometimes you can smell roasted goose drifting downwind, taunting you like an ad you can't afford to skip. There's even a popular saying, the rich get fatter in winter while the poor grow thin. Nothing's changed much, has it? Still, peasants found ways to stretch what little they had. Bread made from a mix of barley, rye, and anything grindable bean flour, acorns, even sawdust in desperate times. You knead dough until your fingers ache, then toss it into the hearth oven. The smell of baking bread lifts spirits faster than any sermon. It's not great bread, but it's warm, and that's what matters. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval cooks actually used moldy grain, intentionally, because they believed it had extra strength. In reality, it probably gave them a dose of ergot fungus, the same stuff that can cause hallucinations. Maybe that explains a few of the winter visions people claim to have. Outside, the snow has turned to a thin sleet. You trudge toward the communal granary, a small timber structure that looks like it's holding its breath. The grain inside is low, almost gone. You can feel the tension of a community watching its food shrink day by day. People whisper about rationing, about praying for an early thaw. One man mutters that God is testing them. Another says it's punishment. Historians still argue whether these famine-era explanations came from faith, fear, or just the need to make sense of relentless misery. By midday, hunger sharpens your senses. You smell the smoke from distant cottages and hear someone splitting wood. The rhythm of the axe, steady and dull, is oddly comforting, like proof that someone, somewhere, still has strength to keep going. You take your lunch outdoors, a hunk of bread, hard enough to chip a tooth, and a slice of cheese so sharp it could double as a weapon. A chicken clucks nearby, feathers puffed against the cold. You imagine what she tastes like, roasted, and immediately feel guilty. Then hungry again. Guilt doesn't fill the belly. As the days stretch on, villagers turn creative. Stews become repositories of mystery ingredients. If it moves, grows, or can be boiled, it's food. Dried nettles, bark flour, even leather, softened and chewed. You laugh at the absurdity, but it's a hollow kind of humor. One old woman claims she can make soup from snow and a prayer. You're tempted to ask for the recipe. The scarcity affects more than your body, it seeps into the mind. People dream about feasts. The village priest gives sermons about heaven's eternal banquet, which sounds suspiciously like psychological torture. Even celebrations, like midwinter feasts, shrink to symbolic portions. A few mouthfuls of meat, watered-down ale, a story told by firelight. But those moments of shared laughter are worth their weight in bread. At night, your stomach protests so loudly it could join the church choir. You lie awake, listening to the wind creep through the shutters. The thatch above you sighs with the weight of snow. Your thoughts wander to spring green fields, lambs, full baskets. It feels like imagining another lifetime. One evening, a rumor spreads. Someone found a buried root cellar that had been forgotten since last year. You grab a torch and join the small crowd trudging through the snow. Beneath a collapsed shed, they unearth jars sealed with wax-pickled vegetables, apples, shriveled but edible, even a jug of mead. The find feels miraculous, like the earth itself taking pity. You sip the mead, its sweetness almost shocking after months of blandness. Everyone cheers, even the priest. For a moment, the world feels generous again, but the joy fades quickly. The food is shared, the cellar emptied. The next morning, the hunger returns, as it always does. You realize something quietly brutal. Survival isn't about winning against winter, it's about outlasting it. You scrape the last of your gruel from the pot, stare at the empty bowl, and let out a small laugh. The joke's on the cold juror, still here, and somehow that feels like victory. You wake before dawn again, throat raw from breathing cold air all night. The embers in the hearth have died to a dull orange eye, and the silence presses in until you cough. The smoke from last night still clings to the rafters, turning the air into a hazy soup of ash and soot. You roll over, groan, and think, Maybe freezing wasn't so bad after all, because here's the thing about medieval heating. It came with a side of self-inflicted misery. The single hearth in your cottage is both savior and saboteur, the fickle heart of your home. If it's burning, you live. If it smokes, you choke. You prod the coals back to life with an iron poker, eyes watering as gray tendrils curl into your face. Welcome to another day in the age of indoor pollution. You shovel in some wood, which hisses and spits because it's still damp. The smell, sharp, acidic, faintly moldy, fills your lungs. Most people in this era didn't have the luxury of seasoned firewood. Trees were precious resources, and much of the forest belonged to the local lord. Cutting wood without permission could earn you a fine or worse, a beating. So you burn what you can get: scraps, branches, peat, dried dung. A mainstream historical fact. Smoke inhalation was a leading cause of chronic illness in medieval households. Without chimneys in early cottages, the smoke simply vented through a hole in the roof or didn't. Walls blackened with soot, eyes watered constantly, and coughs became the background music of life. Scholars even argue that life expectancy may have been shortened simply by trying to stay warm. The air inside your home feels thick enough to chew. Your clothes, your hair, even your blanket all smell like a campfire that overstayed its welcome. You'd open a window if you had one, but the only thing between you and the freezing outdoors is a wooden shutter barely holding itself together. Still, there's a certain comfort in that flickering flame. You sit close, palms extended, watching the light paint your hands in orange. The fire whispers, crackles a small defiance against the vast, cold pressing on the world. For a moment, it's hypnotic. Then a gust of wind blows down the chimney hole, scattering sparks across the floor. You leap up, stamping them out, muttering something that's probably not fit for a Sunday sermon. You remember your neighbor. It's the one who swore by peat bricks instead of wood. She said they burned longer and cleaner. Cleaner, maybe, but they smell like swamp ghosts. You chuckle, cough again, decide not to trade. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some households hung herbs like rosemary or sage above the hearth to purify the smoke. In reality, it just made everything smell like burnt salad. Still, the gesture felt important, like fighting back against an invisible enemy. The church bell rings somewhere beyond the fog, summoning villagers for prayers. You pull your cloak tight and step outside. The air tastes cleaner instantly, though it cuts like glass. Smoke trails rise from every roof, merging into a low gray ceiling over the village. From above, it must look like the world itself is exhaling in exhaustion. You trudge through slush toward the church. The path is lined with ash heaps from hearts of ice of hundreds of fires fighting the same losing battle. The air hums faintly with wood smoke and damp wool, a scent that defines winter here. Inside the church, the air is colder but clearer. You almost prefer it. The priest begins his sermon about endurance, about the warmth of faith and the cold of the soul. You smile faintly. Easy for him to say he sleeps above the sacristy with candles burning all night. Still, his words settle over you like a thin blanket. Sometimes comfort doesn't have to be practical. It just has to sound convincing. Historians still argue whether medieval people became used to discomfort or they simply lacked the language to complain about it. You, for one, have plenty of words for smoke in your eyes, none of them polite. But perhaps they did adapt. Lungs toughened, eyes half blind to the haze, hearts hardened by habit. After the service, you visit the blacksmith's forge to trade for an iron hook to hang your cooking pot higher above the fire. The smith's hut is hotter than the sun, sparks flying like drunken fireflies. He wipes his brow and laughs at your coughing fit. That's the smell of life, he says. You can't tell if he's joking. When you return home, the smoke greets you like an old friend you wish would move out. You hang the pot carefully, adjusting it so it won't blacken your supper beyond recognition. A small success feels enormous these days. You even manage to toast a piece of bread without burning it, a culinary miracle. As night falls, the wind picks up again, moaning through every crack in the walls. You feed the fire carefully, rationing the wood as though it's treasure. The light flickers over the faces of your family, each one pale, eyes glinting like polished stones. You can see the soot smudges on their cheeks, the small coughs hidden behind smiles. One child asks why the fire makes the walls cry. You glance up at the blackened beams, weeping drops of condensation. Because it's cold outside, you say softly, but you're thinking of the air inside, the kind that steals breath and leaves ghosts in the chest. You lie down near the hearth, cheek warm on one side, cold on the other. Somewhere in your half-sleep, you dream of modern things, glass windows, radiators, maybe even a filter fan humming softly. You'd give a year's wages for one clean breath. Outside, snow begins again, silent and heavy. Inside, the fire sputters, coughs, and catches. It's not just heat hits proof you're still alive, still fighting the long war against winter's indifference. You drift off to the sound of wood popping in the hearth. Each spark a heartbeat, each puff of smoke a reminder that survival sometimes stinks, but it's survival all the same. You wake to the sound of dripping water, not the cheerful kind that hints at spring, but the slow, maddening plink of snow melt finding its way through a weak spot in the roof. You roll over and pull your blanket tighter, which is about as effective as wrapping yourself in damp bread. The fire's gone out again. Your breath fogs in the air like a signal flare for misery. Your clothes lie in a crumpled heap beside the bed. You eye them with suspicion, because every morning they've somehow managed to grow colder and heavier overnight. You pick up your wool tunic. It's stiff as a plank. Pulling it on feels like sliding into an ice sculpture. The sensation is so shocking that you let out a strangled yelp, the kind that makes the cat look personally offended. Welcome to the medieval. Wardrobe equal parts, armor and punishment. Wool, linen, fur, these are your choices, and choices is being generous. The layering is strategic. Linen next to your skin to wick away sweat, because yes, you sweat even in the cold. Then wool to trap heat, and if you're lucky, fur for the outer shell. But the problem isn't getting dressed, it's staying dry. Nothing dries properly in winter. Once your clothes are damp, they stay that way until the sun remembers how to function again. You head outside to fetch water, your boots crunching through crusted snow. Every step sends a chill creeping up your legs, as if the ground itself is laughing. People in the distance move like bundled shadows, wrapped so tightly they're more fabric than flesh. The village looks like a herd of walking haystacks. A mainstream historical fact. Most medieval peasants owned only 1 or 2 sets of clothing. Laundry wasn't a weekly chore, it was an event, dreaded and rare. Clothes were washed maybe twice a year, sometimes less, depending on your social rank and tolerance for smell. Water was icy, soap was scarce, and drying meant hanging things near the smoky hearth until they reeked of campfire and regret. You glance at your hands, cracked, red, raw from washing yesterday's rags in the freezing stream. The icy water numbed your fingers until they stopped working altogether. You think about modern detergents and dryers, then shake your head. You can almost hear your ancestors laughing. Dryers? You mean lightning boxes that eat socks? Here's a quirky tidbit. Some households used urine as a detergent. The ammonia in it helped lift grease and stains. You picture someone walking into a laundromat with a jug of the stuff and grin. If you ever invent time travel, that's the first cultural exchange you're bringing back. The day drags on. You patch a tear in your cloak with thread spun from flax, the needle slipping clumsily in your numb fingers. Outside, a gust of wind howls through the shutters, and the cloth ripples on your lap like it's alive. The world feels smaller in winter, reduced to these small acts of maintenance, mending, enduring. Historians still argue whether medieval clothing was truly as uncomfortable as it seems to us, or if people simply adapted to its roughness. Maybe they didn't feel itchy the way you do now. Maybe that persistent wool burn was just the background hum of existence. You tug at your collar and wonder if adapting is just another word for giving up by midday. You're sweating from the effort of hauling firewood, but there's no escape from the damp. The sweat seeps into your underlayers and turns cold almost immediately. It's a cruel cycle. Warm, wet, cold, miserable. You strip off your gloves to wring out your sleeves, and your fingers steamed faintly in the air. You wiggle them and mutter, still alive. The dog gives you a look that says he's unconvinced. You stop by your neighbor's hut to borrow a needle. She greets you with a smile and a smell best described as centuries of damp wool. Inside, bundles of clothing hang from the rafters, trying in vain to dry. The smoke from her fire curls around them, leaving every tunic and cloak with a glossy film of soot. She offers you cider that tastes faintly of smoke too. You both sip in silence, nodding, united in your shared aroma. When you finally step outside again, the sunlight has turned the snow into a blinding white sea. You squint, pull your hood tighter, and trudge toward the stream. You need water for washing the florets, muddy, icy, and faintly horrifying. The bucket fills with a thick gurgle, and when you lift it, your arm muscles tremble from the weight. The handle bites into your palm. You mutter something sarcastic to the universe like, "Ah, yes, the joys of rustic living." Later, you sit by the hearth again, holding your socks near the fire to dry. The steam rises in ghostly tendrils, smelling faintly of feet and smoke. You laugh to yourself. The idea that a noble might walk in here and faint from the odor feels oddly satisfying you. Remember hearing tales of nobles in castles wearing linen, undershirts so fine they could be washed weekly, a luxury unheard of in your world. They even perfumed them with herbs or rose water. You imagine that for a moment, then look at your own tunic, minted 15 times, and snort. Your perfume is eau de peat fire. Night falls fast again. You strip to your linen shirt and crawl under the blanket, clothes hanging near the hearth in their eternal damp state. The smell of wet wool fills the room like a living thing. The fire hisses, wood popping softly. You shift, trying to find a warm spot on the straw mattress, but it's like wrestling a cold, lumpy bear. You close your eyes, thinking how strange it is to live in a time when warmth is something you earn minute by minute. You've layered every piece of clothing you own, and still the air sneaks in, sly and merciless, but the human body starborn, miraculous thing that it is keeps generating heat. Just enough to stay alive. Somewhere outside, a wolf howls. The sound pierces the night, long and low. You shiver, not just from the cold, but from the reminder. Out there, survival wears fangs. In here, it wears wool and smells terrible, but at least it's still breathing. You pull the blanket tighter, smile faintly in the dark, and whisper a promise to yourself. Tomorrow, you'll dry those clothes properly. You won't, of course, but the promise is warm. And for now, that's enough. The morning sky is a dull pewter sheet, heavy and unmoving. You can feel the weight of it pressing down on your shoulders as you crawl out of bed and stretch the stiffness from your joints. Your hands are cracked, your back aches, and you already know what kind of day it's going to be, the kind that starts cold, stays cold, and ends with you questioning your life choices somewhere between frostbite and exhaustion. Because here's the thing about winter in the Middle Ages. There's no such thing as a snow day. One stays home wrapped in blankets, waiting for the thaw. You work or you don't eat. The frost on your eyelashes. That's just the season's way of saying, get moving. You trudge outside, boots crunching over the frozen mud. The sky's the color of tin, and the air bites harder than any boss. Your breath fogs ahead of you like a small ghost leading the way. The fields stretch out silent and dead, their furrows filled with hard snow. You remember what they looked like in summer green, buzzing, alive. Now they're pale tombs, but you still have to tend them. Somehow, a mainstream historical fact. Winter labor never stopped. Medieval peasants repaired tools, wove baskets, mended roofs, carted wood, and cared for animals. In some regions, they cleared drainage ditches or broke ice to water cattle. Idle hands weren't an option. The manorial system demanded constant productivity. If you didn't work, your rent didn't get paid. The Lord Steward wasn't known for his seasonal cheer. You heft a wooden spade, its edge dull from use, and head toward the barn. The animals greet you with low groans and the smell of old hay and manure. Their breath hangs in clouds around their heads. You pat the cow's neck. Her hide feels cold and stiff, her eyes resigned. She's as tired of winter as you are. You haul a pail of water from the half-frozen trough. Ice crusts over before you even reach the stall. You mutter, "Maybe we were both meant for warmer climates," and the cow gives a slow blink, as if agreeing completely. Work in this season is an act of faith. You keep moving, not because it's pleasant, but because stopping feels like surrender. The blacksmith's hammer rings faintly from the village center. Somewhere else, someone is splitting wood, the rhythm steady and relentless. You join that symphony of survival. Every strike against ice and earth, a percussion of defiance. Your hands go numb halfway through. You flex your fingers, but they move sluggishly, like they've forgotten they belong to you. You breathe on them uselessly and laugh. Brilliant plan, evolution, you mutter. Invent opposable thumbs, then freeze them off. It's joke number one for the day if you don't laugh. You might cry, and tears just freeze anyway by mid-morning. The manor steward arrives on horseback, wrapped in furs thick enough to outfit a small army. He looks down at you from the saddle, eyes narrowed against the wind. "Work faster," he calls, his breath misting the air. You resist the urge to point out that his horse is doing all the moving for him. Instead, you nod and swing your spade harder. The feudal contract doesn't care about frostbite. You owe labor days to the Lord, even when your tools splinter from the cold. Historians still argue whether peasants saw this as oppression or obligation, a cruel system, or just the order of things. You, personally, are leaning toward oppression, especially when your foot slips on a patch of ice and dumps you face first into a snowbank. You stand up, sputtering, snow sliding down your collar, and someone nearby chuckles. It's Tomas, your fellow worker, face red and nose running like a stream. "The snow loves you," he says with a grin. "It wants to be close." "'Kay." You throw a clump of it at him and miss completely. By noon, you gather near the barn for a meager meal bread, a scrap of cheese, maybe a sip of ale if you're lucky. Everyone eats fast because the cold steals warmth faster than hunger gives it. A few jokes are exchanged, mostly at winter's expense. Someone swears they saw a fox walking on its hind legs near the frozen river, wearing a priest's stole. Everyone laughs, but not too loud. There's always the faint worry that winter might hear and take offense. Here's a quirky tidbit. Medieval villagers believed certain spirits or cold demons guarded the frost. To whistle while working in winter was said to summon them, so laborers kept quiet, which, conveniently, also meant fewer excuses for slacking off. After lunch, the steward assigns you to mend a section of the palisade fence. The wood's brittle, your hammer's cold, and your patience is wearing thinner than your cloak. You drive nails into warped timber until your arm burns. The sound of each strike echoes off the frozen air, sharp and lonely, somewhere in the woods. A raven croaks a sound that feels older than language. The wind rises in the afternoon, and you pull your hood tighter. Snow whips into your face like powdered glass. The world blurs into white, and for a moment, you can't tell where sky ends and ground begins. It's beautiful, terrifying, endless. You stand there, tools in hand, and wonder how anyone managed to live like this century after century. Then you realize the answer's simple. They had no choice as the day bleeds into dusk. You trudge back home, muscles trembling. You can't feel your toes. You can't even feel your fatigue anymore. It's melted into a dull, steady ache that just is. You push open the cottage door, and warm thing, smoky, warm things, you like an old friend. The fire flickers, your family's faces glow in the light. And for a brief moment, all the frozen misery outside doesn't matter. You collapse near the hearth, boots steaming faintly. Someone hands you a bowl of stewed turnip, barley, and mystery flavor. It's terrible, and it's perfect. You eat slowly, savoring every bite because it means you're done working. At least for now, as you drift towards sleep, you think about the day's labor, about the thousands of people across the centuries who did the same thing. Hands cracked, backs bent, hearts stubborn. You imagine the sound of their work echoing through time, a rhythm that never really stopped. You close your eyes and smile faintly. Still faster than the steward, you whisper. The cat stretches beside the fire, unimpressed. You drift off, soothed by the quiet music of survival, the creak of wood, the crackle of flame, and the steady breath of people who just keep going. The church bell tolls in the distance, muffled by snow, as dawn seeps reluctantly into the world. You wake to its echo 3 slow, somber notes that sound less like a call to prayer and more like a reminder that God's watching to see how much longer you can tough it out. The air inside your cottage feels holy in its own way, sacredly still, sacredly cold. You pull on your stiff tunic, say a half-hearted morning prayer, and step outside into the kind of silence that can make a person believe in spirits. The world is wrapped in white again. Snow clings to the church steeple, and the cross atop it glitters like a frozen flame. Somewhere nearby, someone coughs. Somewhere farther, a rooster gives up on crowing and just wheezes. You make your way toward the church because when winter bites hardest, faith becomes both shield and superstition. People gather slowly, faces pale, breath fogging in unison. You can see the lines of fatigue etched deep into their skin, like frost carved directly by worry. Inside, the church smells of wax, damp wool, and a faint hint of incense. Candles flicker against the stone walls, their light soft but steady tiny suns, defying the season's darkness. You kneel on the cold floor, hands clasped, kiss, and whisper a prayer that's less about salvation and more about slightly better weather. Maybe just 5 degrees warmer, Lord, you murmur, and fewer holes in the roof. A mainstream historical fact. During harsh winters, faith became the social glue that kept medieval communities from collapsing. People turned to saints associated with protection from frostbite, hunger, and illness. St. Moritz, St. Sebald, and St. Blaise were favorites, invoked for warmth and health. Pilgrimages were made to shrines, even in the dead of winterproof, that the human spirit will trudge through snow if it believes there's even a hint of hope waiting at the other end. The priest steps up to the altar, his breath visible as he speaks. His sermon today is on endurance and divine testing. You listen, half comforted, half skeptical. The frost, he says, is God's reminder that we are small. You stifle. A laugh, your fingers, cracked and bleeding, already got that memo. Still, his voice carries through the nave, warm and sure, and something in it eases the ache in your chest. After the service, people linger, talking quietly. The church is one of the few places where warmth exists, not physical warmth, but communal heat, the kind born from shared suffering. You exchange glances with neighbors who've been as miserable as you and realize faith isn't always about belief. Sometimes it's about belonging. A child near the altar touches a candle's flame and yelps. His mother scolds him softly, but the moment feels oddly symbolic. Humans drawn to light, even when it burns. As you step back outside, The cold hits like divine punishment. The snow creaks under your boots, and a gust of wind sends powder spiraling into your face. You pull your cloak tight and head toward the edge of the village, where a small shrine sits half buried in snow. Its wooden cross leans slightly, and offerings of withered flowers cling to its base. Someone's left a small carving of a sheep, a plea for the livestock's safety, no doubt. You kneel, brush snow from your knees, and mutter another quick prayer, just in case the local saints are taking attendance. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval communities believed that frost and snow were the work of mischievous spirits who followed winter saints. To appease them, villagers would leave bread or beer on windowsills, a kind of supernatural snack offering. You tried that once last year. The bread froze solid, and the dog ate it. You head toward the frozen river, where a group of villagers is gathering. Today, they're cutting blocks of ice to store for the Lord's cellar. The priest blesses the water with a quick cross of his hand, muttering Latin that drifts away on the wind. Then, axes swing. The ice groans, cracks, and breaks into slabs that gleam like pale glass. Each strike sends a shudder through the ground, and you imagine even the saints flinching a little. Careful, Tomas warns as you haul a block toward the sled. Last week, Janik went through. You glance at the dark cracks spidering beneath your boots and move faster. The ice may be holy now, but it's still treacherous as dusk falls. The priest makes his rounds through the cottages, blessing doorways with holy water. You kneel when he enters your home, head bowed. The droplets hit your forehead, cold as sleet. May warmth find you, he says. You're tempted to ask if that blessing can be backdated to last month. Historians still argue whether faith in medieval winters was primarily spiritual or practical dead. People truly believe divine protection could stop frostbite, or did it simply help them face another impossible day? The answer, you suspect, doesn't matter much. Belief, like a fire, doesn't need to be logicalized, just needs to burn. Later that evening, Tia, the village gathers around the bonfire for Candlemas, the midwinter feast that marks the halfway point to spring. The flames leap high, sparks swirling into the dark sky. You stand among neighbors, faces glowing orange, voices lifted in tired joy. Children toss pine cones into the fire for luck. Someone plays a flute, so out of tune it sounds heroic. For a few hours, everyone forgets the hunger, the cold, the endless gray. You feel it, then a warmth that isn't from the fire, but from the shared noise, the laughter, the collective stubbornness to stay alive. Maybe that's what faith really is. Not the certainty that things will get better, but the courage to celebrate even when they're terrible. As the bonfire dies down, you stare into the embers, thinking about St. Moritz and the countless winters he must have watched humans stumble through. You murmur one last prayer under your breath, not for miracles, just for one more day like this. The last spark fades, the night deepens, and you walk home under a sky full of cold, indifferent stars. You could almost imagine them as candles lit by saints above, flickering softly in cosmic sympathy. The morning begins, not with birdsong, but with coughing. Not just yours, everyone's. The sound drifts from cottage to cottage like a grim chorus. A village-wide reminder that in winter, sickness moves faster than gossip. You sit up slowly, throat scratchy, head heavy, and wonder whether you're tired or dying. Hard to tell these days. The fire has died down again. You stir it weakly, your fingers trembling. Every movement feels like pushing through honey. There's a damp chill in the air that seeps into your bones, as if the cold itself has decided to live inside you now. Outside, the wind howls mournful, endless. The sound of something alive and hungry. Sickness in medieval winter doesn't need much invitation. The moment the food runs low, the smoke thickens, and bodies huddle close together. Illness slides in through the cracks like a thief. You cough into your sleeve, pull your wool tighter, and force yourself to stand. There's no such thing as a sick day not when there's wood to haul and mouths to feed, a mainstream historical fact. Respiratory diseases like pneumonia, influenza, and tuberculosis were rampant in medieval winters. Houses were smoky, damp, and poorly ventilated. Malnutrition weakened immune systems, and a single infection could sweep through an entire settlement. There were no antibiotics, no hospitals, and very little understanding of what germs were. If you got sick, you either recovered slowly or became part of next. Sunday sermon, you step outside to fetch water and are greeted by a bleak stillness. The village feels quieter today. A door remains closed that's usually open. Smoke doesn't rise from one of the chimneys. You know what that means, but you keep walking. The snow crunches like paper beneath your boots, and the sky hangs heavy with the promise of more. The healer's hut stands at the edge of the village, marked by a crude wooden sign of a mortar and pestle. Inside, the air smells of herbs, vinegar, and despair. The healer, an older woman with hands stained green from plants, greets you with a nod. Cold in the chest, she asks before you even speak. You nod, and she scoops a paste of honey, garlic, and something pungent into a small jar. Rub it on your chest, she says. If you don't die of the smell, it'll cure you if you pay her with half a loaf of bread. Medicine here is an economy of desperation. You leave the hut and smear the concoction onto your skin that night. It burns. It smells like someone tried to cook a swamp, but you can breathe a little easier, and that's worth the stench. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval remedies for winter illness included wearing a bag of crushed herbs around the neck or keeping a live frog in your mouth to draw out the fever. You stare at your jar of garlic paste and decide you got off easy. As days pass, sickness thickens like fog. Children develop rashes. Elders grow quiet. The church bell rings more often now, each toll heavy and slow. You help dig graves in frozen soil, an act of grim solidarity that doubles as exercise. The ground resists every blow of the spade, as if even the earth doesn't want to accept more bodies. One evening, you sit by the fire with Tomas. His cheeks are pale, his cough deeper. He smiles weakly and says, "Maybe God will give us summer in heaven." You laugh, but it sticks in your throat. You change the subject to anything else: the snow, the animals, the rumor that a traveling merchant brought oranges from Spain. Oranges. The very idea feels absurd. Historians still argue whether medieval people feared illness as punishment from God or simply as part of life's rhythm. The truth is probably both. When you live this close to the edge of survival, the line between divine judgment and bad luck gets blurry. You say your prayers, you drink your herbal broth, and you hope death gets bored before finding your door by midwinter. Melancholy settles over the village like an extra layer of frost. People speak less, move slower. The days blur together, great, coughing, quiet. You find yourself talking to the fire sometimes, 'cause at least it answers and crackles. One night, a strange warmth wakes you. You sit up, dizzy, drenched in sweat. Your body's burning, but the air's still freezing. You mutter a prayer to St. Blaise, patron of throat ailments, and hope he's not busy elsewhere. The fever lasts 2 days, maybe 3, it's hard to count. You drift in and out of dreams. Your mother's voice, a green summer field, a loaf of bread that never runs out. When you finally wake, weak but alive, you realize how precious that simple word, live, feels. You shuffle outside to breathe clean air for the first time in days. The sky is still gray, but the light seems softer now, as though the sun's trying to apologize. You look around and see smoke rising from every chimney again. Life, stubborn as ever, has resumed. You go to the church that Sunday. The pews are thinner. The priest's voice cracks as he reads the names of the departed. Candles flicker for each of them, and for a moment, the entire nave glows like a field of tiny souls. You bow your head, whispering a name or two under your breath when you step outside. The cold slaps your face, but it feels clean, almost refreshing. You cough once, hard, and laugh. The sound echoes through the still air. Somehow, against all odds, you're still here. That night, you sit by the fire again, garlic scent lingering on your skin, and think about how fragile it all is: breath, warmth, time. You watch the flames dance, each one a heartbeat of light in a world that loves to test its own endurance. Winter hasn't won yet. Neither have you. But for tonight, there's peace in the stalemate. You wake to silence again, but this time, it's not the peaceful kind. It's the eerie quiet that comes after the snow has buried every sound, when even the wind seems to have given up. You push open your door, and the world greets you with blinding white. The drifts have climbed halfway up your walls overnight, sealing you in like a letter no one intends to open. Your breath catches in your throat as you look out. The village is gone. The rooftops are just faint humps beneath the snow, chimneys poking out like the last breaths of a drowning world. You step forward and immediately sink to your knees. The snow is powder fine, light as ash, but endless. You dig yourself out, panting, muttering, "This is ridiculous," which it is. Medieval winter doesn't just inconvenience it in tombs. You grab your shovel of crude, kind, iron-edged, two-land, begin the ritual of clearing a path. Each scoop feels heavier than the last. The snow squeaks underfoot, the cold biting through your gloves. Your nose runs, your fingers sting, and still, you keep digging. There's no choice. A mainstream historical fact. Heavy snowfalls in the Middle Ages could isolate entire villages for weeks. In the winter of 1316 to 1317, part of what's called the Great Famine of Europe, snow and ice covered the fields so long that supplies rotted and travel ceased. Chroniclers described roofs collapsing under snow weight and people tunneling between homes just to share food and warmth. You glance around your own little tunnel of white and realize you're living a page of that same old misery. You finally reach Tomas's door and knock the snow away until it creaks open. He squints at you, wrapped in more rags than human dignity should allow. "You alive?" you ask. "Barely," he replies. "You?" "Also barely." You share a short, breathless laugh, the kind people use when they're out of strength, but refuse to give in. Together, you shovel paths between a few other cottages, forming what looks like a ghostly labyrinth across the village. Kids peek out from doorways, their cheeks red, their eyes wide with wonder. To them, it's magic. To you, it's work. You half envy their ignorance as the day drags on. You begin to notice strange sounds under the snow pop size, deep groans, the weight of the frozen world pressing down on everything. A barn roof collapses in the distance, the sound muffled like a drum underwater. You flinch, but keep digging. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval villagers believed that snow was God's wool, a protective blanket meant to keep the earth warm while it slept. You squint at the endless white expanse and mutter, "Bit much, don't you think?" Maybe God got carried away with a knitting dot. By midday, the sun peeks out for a moment, a small, pale coin in a gray sky. You stop, lean on your shovel, and watch how the light dances off the snow. It's dazzling, beautiful even, but blinding. For a brief moment, you forget your exhaustion and just stare, mesmerized. Then your fingers remind you that all doesn't generate warmth. Inside again, you peel off your wet clothes and hang them near the fire. The steam rises, filling the room with a damp, earthy smell of melting snow. You sip a bowl of thin broth, its warmth crawling slowly through your chest like a timid animal. Historians still argue whether medieval people feared or revered snow. Some saw it as divine purity, others as a curse from heaven for human sin. You suspect it was both, depending on whether the roof collapsed that week. The next few days blur together. Snow keeps falling, soft and relentless. The paths you dug vanish overnight. You wake each morning to the same pale silence, the same heavy stillness. Time itself seems frozen, okay? Like the world has paused to see if you'll blink. First, you begin rationing food, even tighter half portions, think smaller still. The hunger gnaws quietly, always there. You scrape the last of the lard from the jar and joke weakly. If this snow keeps up, I'll have to start eating snow, just for variety. You'll actually try it later that day. It's UNDERWHELM. In the evenings, you sit by the fire, listening to the creak of the roof under snow's weight. Every sound is suspect. Every groan could be the start of collapse. You whisper a quick prayer to St. Florian, patron of protection from fire and, by extension, you decide everything else. Then, one night, it happens. A loud crack, a rush of powder. You bolt upright as part of your roof caves in, dumping a mountain of snow into your home. The fire sputters, hisses, dies. You're left in darkness, half buried, heart hammering. For a long moment, you just sit there, staring at the collapsed timbers. Then, slowly, you laugh. A short, slightly hysterical sound, because what else can you do? You dig yourself out again, pile what's left of the wood, and relight the fire. Nice try, you whisper to the storm. By dawn, the snowfall has stopped. The air feels still, reverent, as though the world itself is holding its breath. You step outside to a sky scrubbed, clean blue, and sharp as glass. The village looks like a scene from a dream. The snow glittering under sunlight like powdered diamonds. People emerge from their houses, one by one, blinking in the brightness. You can see smiles for the first time in weeks. Children chase each other, tossing handfuls of snow into the air. Tomas waves at you, shaking his head. Survived again, he says. Somehow, you grin, teeth chattering. Snow can try, but we're worse than it is. You spend the day repairing the roof, your body aching, your breath fogging in rhythm. The air smells clean pure in a way only post-storm air can. For a fleeting second, you almost understand why people might call snow gods wool. Maybe it is protection after all, not for the earth, but for the spirit. That night, under a blanket patched more times than you can count, you drift into sleep, listening to the silence outside. It's no longer suffocating. It's peace. The storm has ended, at least for now. When the first thaw comes, it doesn't arrive politely. It crashes in like a drunk guest at a funeral, loud, messy, and utterly unapologetic. You wake to the drip, drip, drip of melting snow sliding off your roof and pooling by the doorway. For a few seconds, you don't quite believe it. Then you step outside, and your boots sink into a slush. So wet and cold, it might as well be betrayal. The world that had been clean and white is suddenly a swamp. Snowbanks sag like exhausted beasts, and rivulets of water carve muddy veins through the village lanes. The air smells of rot and wet wood. It's the scent of the earth waking up. It's not a pleasant awakening. You slosh toward the well, half annoyed, half exhilarated. The sun feels almost warm on your face for the first time in months. You close your eyes, tilt your head back, and let the light soak in. Then a chunk of melting ice slides off the roof and hits you squarely on the shoulder. The universe, as always, has perfect comedic timing, a mainstream historical fact. Medieval thaws were notorious for flooding villages. Without modern drainage or proper roads, melted snow turned paths into bogs, cellars filled with water, livestock drowned, and bridges washed away. Chroniclers describe rivers where there were none before. For peasants, the end of snow didn't mean safety. It just meant a different kind of chaos. You wade through ankle-deep slush to help Tomas clear his doorway. Every shovel of ice reveals another layer of mud beneath, as though the earth itself is sighing in relief and disgust. So this is spring, he jokes. Feels like the world's nose is running. You laugh, because it's true. By afternoon, the fields resemble lakes. The thaw releases months of trapped smells, smoke, dung, decay, all mingling into one potent perfume of medieval reality. You plug your nose and mutter. No candle in the world could fix this. The chickens seemed confused, clucking at the puddles as if unsure whether to drink or swim. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval villagers celebrated the first thaw by scattering ashes from their hearths across the melting snow. They believed it would wake the soil and bless the coming crops. You try it yourself, mostly because it feels symbolic and because you have a lot of ashes. Watching the gray streaks spread across the white gives you a strange satisfaction. It's like painting with survival, but beauty doesn't last long. The meltwater creeps into your cottage, soaking the floorboards. You scramble to lift your belongings, your blanket, your tools. The one wooden chair that doesn't wobble in, set them on stones. The smell of wet wood mixes with smoke from the fire. It's chaos, but it's progress. You remind yourself of that. Historians still argue whether the medieval thaw season was truly a rebirth or merely another hardship phase. Some say it symbolized hope. Others call it the season of mud and death. Standing knee-deep in slush, you lean toward the second camp. Still, there's something alive in the air. Now, a pulse, faint but growing. The snow melt also reveals everything winter tried to hide. Broken tools, lost shoes, even the remains of animals that didn't make it through. You find a sheep's skull half buried near the barn. Pick it up and whisper, "You did your best." Then, after a beat, also, "Thanks for the wool." Kalos humor your favorite coping mechanism. The children, somehow unfazed by the muck, turn the melting fields into a playground. They race boats made of bark down the runoff channels, cheering when one gets caught in a puddle vortex. You can't help but smile. Where adults see work, kids see wonder. Maybe that's the secret to surviving any winter. Okay? Pretend it's a game. You spend the next few days reinforcing ditches to divert floodwater away from the houses. Your back aches, your fingers blister, but each trench you dig feels like a small victory. The village hums with new energy hammering, shouting, laughter, curses. Everyone's out, half working, half celebrating that the sky has stopped trying to kill them at night. The thawing ground releases a deep, earthy scent through your walls. It's intoxicating. You sit by your hearth, feeling warmth that's no longer fighting against despair, but simply existing. The firelight glows on damp stone, and for once, feels like the world isn't shrinking, but expanding again. Then comes the surprise guest, rats. Lots of them. They emerge from their winter hideouts, scurrying across floors and under grain sacks, desperate for food. You spend half the night swatting with a broom, cursing loudly enough for the saints to take notes. You survived the snow just to be eaten by mice. Tomas jokes the next morning. Historical irony, you reply. One evening, as the last of the snow melts into mud, you hear frogs for the first time in months. Their croaks echo across the flooded fields, low, rhythmic, almost musical. The sound is ancient, primal. You close your eyes and just listen. It's the song of persistence, of the earth refusing to stay silent. The next morning, you wake to a thin mist rolling across the ground. The air is damp but soft, carrying the faint scent of moss and thawed grass. You step outside barefoot, just to feel something other than cold. The mud squishes unpleasantly between your toes, but it's warm, shockingly warm. You laugh, loud and genuine. For the first time, laughter doesn't echo like defiance. It just feels natural. You glance around at the village, roofs patched, fires burning, smoke rising lazily into a sky that's no longer gray, but pearly and patient. You know, more storms will come, more sickness, more hunger. But for now, the world feels forgiving again. You tilt your head toward the faint sunlight breaking through the mist and murmur. We made it. Not a prayer this time, just a statement. A fact, the kind that doesn't need belief to be true. The village wakes slowly that morning, still damp from the thaw. Mist curls over the fields, clinging to every blade of grass and puddle like the world itself can't let go. You trudge outside, boots squelching in mud, and immediately regret it. The snow's gone, but the mud is worse. Thick, cold, stubborn. Every step feels like wading through grief. Your hands ached from hauling firewood and repairing roofs the past few days. But the animals need tending, and the barn won't fill itself with hay. You lift a bale, muscles quivering, and mutter, "Somebody should invent elevators." The cow snorts, unimpressed. At least she's consistent in her judgment. A mainstream historical fact. Medieval peasants worked year-round, with winter and spring offering different challenges. Winter demanded survival firewood, shelter, food preservation, while spring brought planting, animal husbandry, and repairs to structures weakened by frost. There was never really a break. You, for one, can feel it in every aching limb. The thaw also means mudslides and puddles everywhere. The roads are unrecognizable. Even your usual shortcut to the granary has disappeared under sludge. You trudge along it anyway, slipping, laughing, seeing a full-body experience in humility. Inside the granary, you're met with a faint smell of rot. Meltwater has seeped in overnight. Some of the stored grain is spoiled. The rest is damp. You lift a sack gingerly and almost gag. Storage was never perfect, and now winter's final insult has arrived. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants were remarkably resilient or just perpetually desperate. You suspect both. Outside, a group of children are tossing mud balls at each other. One hits you square in the chest. You stare at them, dripping, laughing despite yourself. Their cheeks are bright red, their laughter pure. You realize that even in hardship, humans, especially children, find ways to play. You give a mock glare and dive in, turning the fields into a battlefield of mud. Here's a quirky tidbit. Peasants, sometimes, celebrated the first thaw by releasing small boats made of bark into the streams. The boats were meant to carry away bad luck and winter spirits. You've never tried it, but you imagine the river littered with tiny vessels bobbing in the brown. Muddy water, a flotilla of hope. By noon, the sun pokes weakly through the mist. You pause to breathe, feeling the damp air fill your lungs. It's not warmth, not exactly, but it's alive. The smell of wet earth reminds you that life persists. Even under the worst conditions, you spend the afternoon repairing fences torn by ice, mud, and frozen ground. Each nail driven feels like a small triumph. The barn walls, once bowed under snow, stand straighter now. You glance at the roof, patched haphazardly but solid enough to survive the next frost. Survival is a patchwork. It's just like everything else in this season. The villagers gather for a brief respite near the fire outside the smithy. Everyone's wet, tired, muddy, but alive. Tomas leans against a post, grinning. We survived snow, ice, frostbite, hunger, and now mud, he says. You laugh. And somehow, the rats didn't kill us. He nods solemnly, as if that was the real miracle. Evening arrives with its own peculiar chill. The mist thickens again, curling around the cottages and fields, turning the familiar village into a ghostly landscape. You light a small fire inside your home, the smoke curling up the chimney like a sigh of relief. The warmth reaches your bones, slowly but surely. The thaw has brought both relief and challenge. Flooded roads, damp floors, ruined grain, but also glimpses of life returning, streams flowing, animals wandering freely, birds chirping faintly again. It's a delicate balance between hope and misery, the push and pull of survival in a world dictated by weather. You sit near the fire, nursing a thin bowl of soup. The warmth seeps into your chest, and you savor it. For a moment, you forget the aches, the mud, the relentless rhythm of labor. For a brief, luminous second, there is peace. Outside, the mist begins to fade as stars appear. The village is quiet now, settling into a temporary truce with the world. You curl under your blanket, warm, tired, and thankful. Tomorrow, work will resume. The mud will fight back, and winter's ghost will linger in memory. But tonight, there is calm. You let your eyes close, listening to the drip of remaining ice from the roof. It's a lullaby, strange and uneven, but soothing. You survived frost, snow, hunger, and illness. Surely a little mud is no match for you. The night air smells faintly of thawed mud and smoke as you wake once more. You can hear the faint drip of water from the eaves, a slow, rhythmic sound that seems almost musical after months of relentless cold. You stretch stiffly, muscles complaining, and glance at the fire. The embers still glow weakly, holding the night's warmth like a stubborn heart. Outside, the world is in transition. The snow has largely disappeared, leaving behind puddles, mud, and a patchwork of frozen earth. The thaw has been kind, in one sense. Light penetrates deeper, and the days are longer. But it also brings new labor. You trudge toward the barn, your boots sloshing through rivulets. Every step is a negotiation with the earth. You feed the animals, and they nuzzle your hands with wet, muddy noses. Their warmth feels miraculous against your chilled skin. Even the chickens seem revived, clucking and hopping, as though winter's lethargy never touched them. You laugh, softly, the sound echoing off walls and fences, slick with ice and mud. A mainstream historical fact: medieval peasants often had to balance surviving the winter with preparing for spring planting. Flooded fields, delayed sowing, damaged seed stores, and could lead to famine if not managed carefully. Winter's retreat was never a guarantee of ease. It was simply the next chapter of labor. The thaw also stirs the village's social rhythms. Neighbors meet along muddy paths, offering help, exchanging news, gossiping, and sometimes scolding each other for leaving waterlogged roofs unchecked. You help Tomas repair a fence line, hammering nails into wet wood. Each strike sends vibrations up your arms, reminding you that effort is still your currency in this season. Here's a quirky tidbit. Villagers believed that when snow melted quickly, mischievous water spirits called nixies were most active. Some would leave offerings of bread or coins at stream edges to placate them, hoping their livestock wouldn't vanish overnight. You imagine floating bread in puddles and feel slightly superior to these ancient customs, until you realize a rat just stole your last piece of bread. By mid-morning, the village feels alive in a new way. The thawing water gurgles, filling ditches, eroding paths, and nourishing the trees already trembling with early buds. Children splash in puddles, shrieking with delight, while the elders complain about mud-stained boots and damp stockings. You watch, remembering the endless winter just passed. Life persists. Historians still argue whether peasants viewed spring as liberation or merely a continuation of hardship. Standing in knee-deep mud, helping a neighbor steady a sagging post, you feel it's probably both. Joy and toil coexist. Relief carries the weight of labor as afternoon stretches on. The sun warms the soil enough for you to start planting early herbs in a small garden plot. It's a delicate, hopeful task. Soil is still cold, hands still numb. Each seed planted feels like a victory over the months of ice and darkness. You water the tiny green shoots carefully, whispering encouragement like a superstitious gardener. Evening approaches with its own rituals. The fire in your cottage burns brighter now, feeding on dry, salvaged wood. You cook a stew of root vegetables, the aroma rich and welcoming. Family gathers, faces softened by the day's labor, hands calloused and dirty, but proud. Tomas drops by, offering a loaf of bread, his grin as wide as ever. You laugh together, muddy boots and all, outside. Birds sing for the first time in weeks, their voices tentative, as though testing the thawed air. You pause to listen, thinking how strange it is to find music in a world that spent months in silence. The sound is a gentle reminder that survival is a rhythm, repeated in laughter, hammering, trips, and chirps alike. You settle near the fire, letting your body soak in warmth. Mud-streaked and weary, you close your eyes and imagine the first proper spring you've seen in years. The snow is gone, the air smells alive, and for the first time, the world seems forgiving. Just a little. Tomorrow will bring more work fields to till, barns to repair, roofs to patch, but tonight, you let the fire hold you. The warmth your reward for enduring the long, brutal months. You think of frostbitten fingers, frozen rivers, and the winter's relentless grip. And yet, here you are, breathing, warm, alive. The following morning greets you with a soft, golden light, diffused through mist that hovers lazily over the village. The thaw has transformed the world into a patchwork quilt of mud, puddles, and patches of stubborn snow, still clinging to shaded corners. You step outside, boots sinking slightly into the wet ground, and take a deep breath. The air is damp, but rich with life, carrying the scent of earth, wood smoke, and faint blossoms daring to appear. You make your way toward the fields. Villagers are busy clearing debris left by the thaw. Broken branches, stray stones, and chunks of ice litter the soil, remnants of winter's stubborn rain. You bend over, picking through the muck, hands chilled but determined. Each movement is labor, yes, but also liberation. The sun warms your back as you straighten, momentarily forgetting the aches in your muscles. A mainstream historical fact. Medieval peasants often faced a compressed cycle of labor, with winter's end demanding rapid preparation for spring planting. Delays could mean crop failure, famine, or both. The world outside your cottage is a reminder that the change of seasons wasn't just symbolic, it was survival. Tomas appears beside you, carrying a wooden rake heavier than it should be. Mud everywhere, he mutters, shaking his head. It's like the ground wants to swallow us. You laugh, though it's half grimace, half delight. The children splash through puddles nearby, oblivious to hardship, their laughter slicing through the damp morning. You almost envy them. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some villages, the first mud of spring was considered magical. People would smear it on doorways to ensure fertility of fields, livestock, and even themselves. You find yourself thinking about it as you smear mud along a fence post for traction, good luck, and practicality. All in one dot. By midday, you pause to rest. Sweat mingles with mud, soaking your clothes, but the warmth of the sun on your skin feels miraculous. You watch the stream, swollen from melting snow, rushing past. It carries not just water, but a sense of momentum, a promise that the earth itself is moving forward. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants truly celebrated spring or merely endured its challenges. From your vantage, it's both. Relief from frost, yes, but now labor intensifies. Crops need planting, and every misstep could be disastrous. The balance between hope and hardship is delicate. As afternoon drags on, you help repair the fences along the riverbank. The mud clings to your boots like a second skin, and the waterlogged posts fight back, sinking into the saturated soil. Each nail hammered is a small victory against both earth and winter's memory. You glance at Tomas, who gives a thumbs up covered in mud, and you return it with a grin. Survival is a team effort. Evening comes with the faint promise of calm. The village gathers near the church for vespers. Candles flicker, illuminating faces streaked with mud and sweat, glowing with resilience. The priest's voice carries softly, reading from scripture about renewal and patience. You can almost imagine that he's talking about this very thaw, this very mud, this exact moment of fragile rebirth. Afterwards, people linger outside, sharing stories of winter hardships, laughter, and the occasional grumble about flooding. The communal energy is warm, a counterweight to the cold and damp. You breathe it in, letting it fill spaces left hollowed by frost and illness. You return to your cottage as night falls, body aching but spirit lighter. The fire warms you slowly, licking your damp clothes with gentle heat. Outside, the moon reflects off lingering puddles, silver and calm. For the first time in weeks, You feel steady, not triumphant, not victorious, but simply present. The thaw has arrived, messy and inconvenient, yet undeniable. Winter's brutality has passed, leaving behind lessons, scars, and resilience. You pull your blanket around your shoulders, settle near the fire, and close your eyes. The world is muddy, yes, but alive, and so are you. The following day, the thaw has softened further, turning the village lanes into sticky ribbons of mud. You trudge through it, boots squelching with every step, water seeping into the seams. The winter's icy grip has loosened, but it leaves in its wake a sticky, unyielding reminder. Relief is never easy. You pass the granary, its walls streaked with runoff. Imagine the roof during last month's snow, bowing under weight, creaking ominously. You shiver not from cold, but from memory. The fields demand attention. Muddy, waterlogged, and stubborn, the soil resists every tool you thrust into it. The frost may have gone, but the earth remembers. You press the shovel into the ground, muscles protesting. But think about how work has a rhythm here, a harsh, unyielding tempo that doesn't pause for breath. Even now, after weeks of hardship, still part of it, a mainstream historical fact. Medieval peasants often faced spring floods that could destroy stored seed and ruin fields. Irrigation systems were rudimentary, relying on ditches, embankments, and sheer human effort. Delays or mismanagement could mean entire seasons lost. Survival, as always, demanded constant labor. Tomas appears, carrying tools and grumbling about the persistent mud. I swear, he says, the earth enjoys laughing at us. Q. Wiping mud from your hands. The joke is necessary, a small shield against fatigue and frustration. Without it, you might collapse under the weight of the season's endless demands. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some regions, villagers believed that listening to birdsong during spring work could predict crop success. You pause for a moment, trying to identify the faint chirps above the splashing water and dripping eaves. The birds sound cheerful, if that can be said for birds that survived winter. You nod. Maybe they're right. By midday, you're drenched in sweat and mud, but the sunlight feels transformative. It doesn't just warm. It illuminates, energizes, and even inspires a kind of hope that winter never allowed. You glance at the half-thawed river, watching the current swirl with runoff, and marvel at the sheer persistence of water. It doesn't stop, doesn't falter, just flows. Historians still argue whether peasants approach spring with optimism or dread. The end of winter is relief, yes, but it's also the start of intensified work, planting, preparing for the coming seasons. You nod toward your fields, planting small seeds with care, hands caked in mud. Hope and toil coexist here. Children appear again, barefoot in puddles, their laughter bouncing across the fields. You momentarily envy them, but then Tomas throws a splash of mud your way, reminding you that life is ongoing, messy, and occasionally humiliating. You return fire, and the game begins. Even in survival, there is room for joy. As the sun lowers, you pause near the barn, surveying the day's labor. Fences repaired, ditches cleared, seeds planted. The village is alive with motion again, vibrant and determined. The mud remains relentless and sticky, but so does the human spirit. Evening descends slowly. You sit by your fire, mud drying on your boots, clothing still damp. The aroma of simple stew fills the cottage. Outside, frogs croak near the thawed ponds, and a gentle wind carries hints of early blooms. You inhale deeply, allowing the richness of life to fill you. For the first time in weeks, the rhythm feels manageable. Survival is still exacting, but life is returning in pulses. You rest near the fire, listening to the soft sounds of a village awakening, and feel gratitude for the resilience that carried you through winter and into this muddied, hopeful spring. Morning arrives, crisp and fragrant, a subtle promise after the relentless months of frost and mud. You step outside and immediately notice the change. The village hums with activity. Water from the thaw has receded slightly, revealing a ground still sticky but no longer treacherous. You pull your boots through the mud, feeling the earth beneath your feet as if greeting an old friend after a long absence. The animals stir energetically, liberated by open paddocks and thawed pastures. Chickens flap and cluck, cows paw at the soft soil, and the pigs root joyfully. You laugh, patting one cow's damp muzzle. She sighs, as if aware that the season of torment has finally eased. Even the horses stomp with renewed vigor, shaking loose the last of their winter coats. A mainstream historical fact. Spring work was essential for peasant survival. Fields needed tilling, seeds required planting, and livestock had to be moved to new grazing grounds. Any delay could have cascading consequences on harvests, health, and the village economy. You realize that thaw brings life, but with it, relentless responsibility. You head to the stream to check the water flow. The thaw has filled it to near capacity, and the current sweeps briskly over rocks smoothed by winter ice. You marvel at the force of nature, remembering how frozen waters once blocked movement and threatened survival. Now, it carries a quiet reassurance. Life goes on. Here's a quirky tidbit. Villagers often threw small wooden charms into rivers during spring floods, believing the water would carry away winter's evils and bless crops. You find yourself tossing a twig into the current with the same intent-part ritual, part whimsy and watch it bob away. Tiny witness to your own survival. By midday, the village square is buzzing. People haul supplies, repair homes, and laugh at minor mishaps caused by lingering mud. Tomas greets you with a muddy grin. We've survived frost, ice, sickness, and snow, he says. Mud is nothing now. You nod, realizing that endurance has hardened your perspective. No weather can intimidate you now. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants viewed spring as a relief or simply the next phase of survival. You think it's both. Relief is real, yes, but so is labor, responsibility, and vigilance. You feel the tension in your shoulders ease slightly, but you know it will return with planting and care of livestock. The afternoon is spent tending crops. The soil, softened by thaw, is more forgiving, yet still heavy with water. You plant rows of barley, lettuce, and early herbs, hands submerged in the damp earth. Each seed is a wager against nature, a tiny gamble that the harsh months won't undo your efforts. Children playing nearby, laughing and chasing one another through puddles. You watch them and recall the silence of midwinter, the biting wind, the fear of frozen rivers. Their joy is a reminder that life persists even when conditions are merciless. As evening settles, the sun drapes a golden glow across the village. Smoke curls from chimneys, water ripples in leftover puddles, and the air carries a faint fragrance of new growth. You sit by the fire, worn and muddy, listening to the subtle symphony of life frogs calling, birds chirping, and neighbors' distant chatter. You close your eyes, feeling the warmth seep into your bones. Winter's cruelty has passed, leaving behind scars, stories, and resilience. The village breathes again, tentative but alive. You whisper to yourself, we made it through, together, and allow yourself the small luxury of peace. The days stretch longer now, and the village awakens fully from its frozen slumber. You move through it with a sense of calm authority, each step measured, aware of the mud, the uneven ground, and the lingering patches of ice that haven't yet surrendered to the sun. The thawed earth squelches beneath your boots, but it feels alive, welcoming even. A stark contrast to the rigid, bone-deep cold that dominated just weeks ago. You check the livestock first. The cows graze lazily, tails flicking away the first mosquitoes of spring. Chickens scratch enthusiastically at the ground, finding insects exposed by melting soil. The pigs root through the dirt, oblivious to the labor of months that has preceded their moment of freedom. The animal's energy is infectious, and you feel it course through your own body, reminding you that life persists in stubborn, surprising ways. A mainstream historical fact: medieval villages relied heavily on spring labor to recover from the winter's losses. Fields had to be replanted, fences repaired, and stored food rotated or replaced. The success of these tasks could dictate survival for months. You feel the weight of this history as you straighten a fence post and dig a shallow ditch to redirect runoff water. By midday, neighbors emerge, boots caked in mud, hands calloused, faces streaked with dirt and sweat. Work is communal. Repair, planting, and preparation happen in tandem. Conversations flow easily now, light and teasing. Tomas waves at you, his grin broad. Survived frost, snow, mud, and rats. What else could winter throw at us? You laugh, the sound echoing across the fields, carrying relief, camaraderie, and stubborn pride. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some regions, peasants believed that dancing in the thawed mud could bring fertility to the fields. You laugh at the idea, but feel a strange kinship as you stomp through soft earth, tossing a handful of soil toward freshly planted seeds, imagining the fertility it could bring. The thaw also brings introspection. Walking along the riverbank, you see debris from winter-broken branches, lost tools, the occasional frozen carcass. Nature remembers, and so do you. Every hardship survived, every frost endured, leaves an imprint, shaping not only the village, but your sense of self. Historians still argue whether the medieval harsh winter shaped the human psyche or merely tested it. You think it did both? By late afternoon, the village hums with quiet productivity. Crops are planted, animals fed, and homes patched. The sun casts long shadows, turning puddles into pools of molten gold. You pause, leaning on your shovel, mud drying on your boots, and take it all in the resilience, the laughter, the subtle music of life. Returning evening arrives, bringing calm after days of labor. Smoke curls from chimneys, the river glimmers, and frogs croak their cautious song. You sit near the fire, exhausted but content, thinking about winter's lessons. Cold, sickness, hunger, and snow survived. The village breathes again, cautious yet vibrant, proof of endurance and tenacity. You reflect on the months of hardship, the frozen rivers, the fevers, the collapsed roofs, and the relentless snow. Each memory is a thread woven into a tapestry of survival. You sip thin soup, the warmth spreading slowly through your body. Outside, the wind carries the faint scent of blooming earth, a whisper that life continues, resilient. Despite everything, the stars emerge, delicate and indifferent, witnessing the village's persistence. You close your eyes, feeling the fire's warmth, the mud-stained earth beneath your boots, and the collective heartbeat of a community that refuses to break. Winter tried to crush you, and yet here you are, alive, grounded, and quietly triumphant. Tomorrow will bring more work, more challenges, and perhaps more mud. But tonight, the village rests. You sink deeper into your blanket, eyes closing, listening to the gentle night sounds. Survival has its own rhythm. You've learned to move in harmony with it. The village lies quietly under a sky washed in soft moonlight. You feel the lingering warmth of the fire on your skin, and the cold that once gripped you so fiercely now feels distant, almost like a story from someone else's life. The mud, the snow, the ice, they all fade slowly in your mind, placed by the gentle sounds of nighttime. A distant owl, the croak of frogs, the occasional drip of water from a thawed roof. You draw the blanket closer, cocooned from the world outside. Your body softening into the rhythm of rest. Breath deepens naturally, rising and falling with an ease you almost forget existed. You think of the frost-bitten mornings, the heavy snowfalls, the fevers and fatigue. Realize how small those hardships seem now, painted against the tapestry of spring's tentative light. There is a quiet dignity and endurance and satisfaction in survival that requires no celebration, only acknowledgement. You can feel it in your chest, a subtle warmth like the embers of a long-burning fire. Outside, the village sleeps. Chimneys puff gentle smoke into the dark sky, and shadows of fences and trees stretch softly across damp fields. Even the animals rest now, their energy spent, their instincts attuned to the steady rhythm of life that persists regardless of winter's cruelty. You allow yourself to imagine a world where the ice has fully melted, where the rivers flow freely, where hands are dry, and the sun is permanent. If only for a little while, your mind slows, thoughts wandering less and less. You hear your own heartbeat, steady and calm, and feel gratitude for the warmth, the shelter, and the small, unspoken triumphs of each day. The lessons of survival sink in gently, whispering that resilience is both ordinary and extraordinary, that even when the world tests you to its limits, peace can be found in the quiet after. And so, under the soft hum of a night that feels infinite yet safe, you drift into sleep, knowing the world continues and that you have endured.